On the 24th of July 2022, the entertainment industry lost one of its most beloved actors. Whether on stage, screen, television or radio, David Warner was loved and respected by colleagues, creators and fans alike, and the world over. David was remembered for films such as Tom Jones, The Omen and Titanic. His Hamlet is still recognised as one of the very best to this day, and he appeared in cult TV programs such as Star Trek, Babylon 5 and Doctor Who. Fans of Big Finish were thrilled when in 2003, David Warner played the Doctor in one of a range of stories that explored alternative universes and doctors called Doctor Who Unbound. He loved the experience of working with Big Finish so much that he was eager to return, and was soon cast in the lead role alongside Susannah Harker in an audio reimagining of Sapphire and Steel. For the rest of his life, David would appear in Big Finish productions regularly, in both Doctor Who and other series such as The Scarifiers, Jago and Lightfoot, Blake 7 and Dark Shadows. He would reprise his role as the Unbound Doctor in the Bernice Summerfield range, and his final work with Big Finish was released in November 2022, Shilling and Sixpence Investigates Volume 2, aptly titled In Loving Memory. We spoke with some of the actors, creators and fans from David's time at Big Finish to get some deeper insight into this incredibly talented and endearing man. Gary Russell was the director of many Big Finish productions in the early years of the company, including Doctor Who Unbound, Sympathy for the Devil. What was the first time he had seen or heard of David Warner?
The Omen. Definitely The Omen was the first thing I saw him in. I think I fell in love with him in Time Bandits, but also Tron. I think they were the three things that sort of... I mean, I've seen David Warner in hundreds of things, and he'd done, various Star Trek movies and Star Trek TV shows and things. But as a kid, I remember him in The Omen, and I remember his death. So I remember knowing the name David Warner, and then when he was in Time Bandits and Tron, I was like, whoa! And he's so brilliant in Time Bandits. I think he actually completely steals Time Bandits from everyone else that's in that film. And then he's the villain in Tron, and I'm a huge Tron fan, and I love everything about that film. I sort of went to this first film I ever saw in the cinema, I think, by myself, where I just thought, nobody else wants to see this film, and David Warner's in it, so I want to go and see it. I didn't know anything about Tron at all, and I fell in love with it, but I went to see it because of him.
Although Annette Badland has been acting since 1970, she is loved by Doctor Who fans not only for her work on the TV series, but in many different roles on audio for Big Finish. Does she have any memory of the first time she saw David perform?
Oh, I can't remember. He was a little older than me. I saw his Hamlet, of course, which was absolutely stunning as a theatre actor. And then in film, I mean, I can't remember the first time, but he always just brought such a quality to the roles he played. And of course, because I was just following him, I was a student when he was just a young actor, and so he was inspirational, because he was beautiful, he was extremely talented, but you knew it was genuine. There wasn't an arrogance, a self-awareness. He was concerned about the roles that he played, which is just tremendous. He didn't appear to be interested in his own reputation or, self-aggrandizing himself. He just played the roles. And it would have been very easy, I imagine, to be misled, to be a handsome young man and fated. It would have been very easy for him to go off on the kind of trail of, being the handsome young lead. And he didn't. He cared about the work.
Actor, writer, and host of the Best Pick movie podcast, Tom Salinsky.
I've got a very clear memory, and it's of being taken to the movies by my mum when I was about 9 or 10 years old to see a movie which is a bit of an odd duck, but one that a lot of people, particularly people about my age, adore. And it's anchored by an amazing performance from David Warner. And I'm talking about Time Bandits. It's such a kind of determinedly peculiar movie. Nothing about it makes sense. The premise doesn't make sense. The execution doesn't make sense. The ending makes no sense whatsoever. But in the middle of it, you've got David Warner giving this kind of classic villain performance, but with just enough little winks to the audience, just enough levels of irony that nobody could be genuinely scared, even if you were 9 or 10 years old. It's a much more sophisticated performance, I think, than the trappings of that film might lead you to believe.
Creative Director of Big Finish Productions, Nicholas Briggs.
Well, funny enough, I think it was a photograph of him in, what was that film that he was famous for? Morgan, A Case for Study? Was that what it was called? Where he played this sort of eccentric person. It was in a 60s movie. And I remember that this is so bizarre, in my digs in North London, when I first left drama school, I thought the wallpaper was so terrible. I thought I'd buy lots of interesting movie stills from Forbidden Planet and stick them on the wall. And it just struck me as an interesting photo. And then I thought, that name, David Warner, I recognized that. And I slowly became aware that he seemed to be in almost everything, and from then on, I was very aware of him as an actor. But I didn't meet him until I think Big Finish did a thing called Sympathy for the Devil, which was part of the Doctor Who Unbound series, and David played the Doctor. And I think that I was already aware that people had been talking about the possibility of David Warner making a really good Doctor for ages. And so it was quite a coup. I think Mark Gatiss, who needs no introduction here, got David Warner. I think somehow he'd worked with David or met him, and I think Gary Russell at Big Finish, obviously we all knew Mark, and Gary knew Mark very well, and they got him in. So he was recording Sympathy for the Devil while I was recording a Big Finish story called Creatures of Beauty in the other studio. There were 2 studios at the place we were using at the time. And then it must have been shortly after that Mark Gatiss, long story short, got me involved in Nebulous, which was a BBC Radio 4 comedy series. And he got me to direct and do the music and sound design for it. And of course, David was a hugely important part of that, and had played Dr. Clench, the returning villain, who always had some outrageous and totally illogical plan and got very cross about it all the time. Clench was a good name, actually. There was a real clench in his voice, So yeah, that's when I got to work with and know David and have fun with him, and it was when he came back for other Big Finish things afterwards. That's when we became very friendly, and I enjoyed many chats with him.
Actor, writer and script editor, John Dorney.
I think in general, in the sphere of pop culture, the first encounter I had with David Warner, I suspect is a lot of people's first encounter with him, which is Time Bandits. I'm pretty certain it's got to be Time Bandits. I remember seeing that as a kid. There was a backup comic strip, something like the Return of the Jedi comic, and I missed a couple of issues, so I missed at least one bit, and I was really frustrated, so I had to watch the film, which I saw after reading the comic adaptation of it. And obviously he's the villain in that, and is truly magnificent. He's one of the iconic movie villains, not just for that, but for several villains he's played, because he is just really, really good at them. And Time Bandits is a particularly good example, because it's a beautifully sort of witty, dark performance. He manages to do everything and make it seem effortless. I think, obviously, I saw Tron probably around the same time. Maybe I suspect it's later. I've never quite had the same level of affection for Tron as Time Bandits. But I think, Time Bandits is definitely a better film. But they're all in the mix. And then, I think once you're interested in genre stuff, then obviously he keeps turning up and popping up in all manner of films and in all manner of places, and it's he's always very exciting to see in everything.
Nigel Fares is an actor, writer and producer who became a close friend. What were his early memories of David Warner before they actually worked together?
Gosh, that's an odd question, because when I first met him, I had absolutely no idea who he was. Yeah, to my shame. But actually, that was fine. And actually, I think that worked better for us as in our working relationship and in friendship as well, because I wasn't overawed, as certainly a lot of people have been when they first met him. I just was presented with him on the first day of Sapphire and Steel, which was an audio series I was working on with him as the star, one of the stars. And this is David. I thought, oh my God, what a gorgeous voice. And by the end of the first day, what a fantastic actor. I must look him up. And then as the week went by, I never did. And thank goodness I didn't, because I think I would have been just like jelly. Because he's so renowned. In fact, when we were doing Sapphire and Steel, we often got guest members who would, of the cast, who would do it just because David was in it. You know, they'd say, "Oh, David Warner, really? Oh, yes. Oh, no, I don't need to read the script. No, yeah, certainly I'll come. Yes, I've got David Warner, really?" And by then, of course, I knew exactly who he was. So, and once I had found out who he was, of course, I remember him from Time Bandits and Star Trek and loads of films. I wish I'd seen his Hamlet, because I think that was the thing that enabled us to get any actor or an actress of a certain age into the studio with him, would be that Hamlet, which was groundbreaking. Yeah, but no, I think because I wasn't overawed by him, maybe we had a fabulous working relationship and then friendship right from the start.
What about some of David Warner's standout performances? Tom Salinsky.
Yeah, I think what is interesting is he was kind of a little bit typecast by Hollywood as the kind of generic British bad guy. So he crops up in quite a lot of fairly poor movies doing that. But I think what's interesting about him is that he had a casualness with dialogue, which was very deceptive. So he's kind of wasted in Star Trek V, which is a pretty terrible movie anyway. But he has this kind of loose, relaxed quality, which is really at odds with a lot of what other people tend to do in these genre films. Now, even in something as sophisticated as Dune, there's still a little bit of people standing around and declaiming their intentions at each other. And you never catch David Warner doing that. And I think that's one of the things that was so impressive about him. So, but he was able to have fun as well. He's a lot of fun in The League of Gentlemen's Apocalypse. Again, not a movie which is an unbridled success by any means. And I think even The League of Gentlemen would probably subscribe to that view. But it's got lots of good things in it. And he is incredibly fun as Erasmus P. So there's a kind of... it's easy to criticize people who... keep turning up in lots of different stuff. You know, there comes a point in Robert De Niro's career where it seems sort of obvious he's just in it for the money now. I think that David Warner, he just enjoyed acting. And therefore he would take any job that came along because acting was more fun than not acting. And that delight in being able to pretend and to be someone else, I think shines through so many of these performances. I mean, everyone remembers him in The Omen, but possibly more for his prosthetics than his actual performance. It's sort of hard to pick because he's never bad. He always manages to elevate the material. I think for nostalgia reasons, it is probably Time Bandits that stands out for me more than anything else. A very early performance for him, all the way back in 1963, like his third or fourth film role, I think. He's in Tom Jones. and they are slightly thrown away, but still giving it everything he's got. He's in Titanic as the kind of the villain's right-hand man. He's done loads and loads for Big Finish, and it would be, I think, impossible to list them all, although maybe you guys will have a go. But way back in the early 2000s, Big Finish was doing this regular series of Unbound adventures where they would cast new actors as the Doctor and do these sort of what-ifs. And I thought that was a really interesting way of using the format and a very interesting way for Big Finish to use the license. And I think of all of those, the one that was the most successful was the one with David Warner. I think it's called Sympathy for the Devil. Is that right? It's a lovely bit of what if, not only because of what it says about who the Doctor is, but also because, David Warner's pretty plausible casting as the Doctor. If things had gone a different way, maybe when Tom Baker left or when Peter Davison left, you can kind of imagine him doing it. As we said, he loves acting. And so I don't think he would have looked down on it. Possibly he wouldn't have wanted to be tied down to a single part. But it's it's a part with such scope that maybe he would have. I'm not a huge fan of Cold War. I think it suffers badly from an ending in which the Ice Warriors could blow up the world, and the Doctor's plan to stop them is to hope that they don't. But again, there's a kind of relaxed quality to David Warner's contribution in a part which could have been very stiff and very one note. He's able to find little things to play with and just make it feel a bit more fun. And it's a story that sort of, despite its claustrophobia, does want to be fun. It does want to be the Hunt for Red October. It wants to be this sort of boy's own adventure. And I think he finds the tone of that very, very accurately. Star Trek 5, he's sort of wasted. Star Trek 6, he's... well, I rewatched Star Trek 6 recently, and there's two villains who are hiding in plain sight. One is the only person on the bridge of the Enterprise we haven't met before. And the other one is the cackling bald guy with the eye patch. So it's pretty difficult to be caught out. But maybe David Warner is in there as a bit of misdirection. You can at least briefly wonder, until he's murdered, whether David Warner is going to turn out to be the bad guy. And of course, it's an excuse to have him quote Shakespeare. And he was a Shakespearean actor. But we have to talk about Chain of Command. Again, this could have been another moustache twirling, cackling bad guy. But the script is incredibly good, but it's also not too overwritten. It does leave gaps into which a really sensitive and skilled actor can flow. And the sight of Patrick Stewart and David Warner sharing the screen together is extraordinary. And it's a remarkable piece of television drama by any level. I would put that second episode of Chain of Command up there with pretty much anything that television drama has had to offer.
John Dorney.
He can basically do a great performance in everything. That's the thing. Whatever it is. I mean, famously, there's this quote somebody made about him working with, I can't remember who it was, but I've been like, I don't know, it can't be Malcolm McDowell, but someone along those kind of lines, where they're asking him a question about what he was going to do next. He's going, I'm going to go and do Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, Secret of the Ooze. Because he enjoyed working, but there's a lot of great films. Obviously, there are some of the iconic ones of things like The Omen is probably right up there. It's one of my favourites, where he is probably the subject of the best death, but also just such a huge aspect of the general sort of tension and air of menace and threat that film has. It's a very sort of heady brew, that film, and they've never really caught it with any of the sequels. So I've got my wall of DVDs over there, and that's the only Omen film I've got, because and at least part of that is because you've got David Warner being amazing in it. The aforementioned Time Bandits, the aforementioned Tron, but basically, like anything he'll turn up in, he's great in Straw Dogs. He's great in Time After Time. He's an amazing, Klingon president, crying out loud. That gives that part quite a bit of weight, and he's even a really good, Earth ambassador in Star Trek 5 as well. He's great for just adding weight and gravitas to things where you kind of I always found it quite weird, really, that there's a faintly bad habit that Babylon 5 had, where it seemed to like throw away all its best actors in the worst episodes. I mean, I don't think the episode Grail is awful, but it's this bit where we go, if he only was like one of the big arc characters, but you've just got David Warner just wandering through as pure class, making this episode far more watchable than it has any right to be. And And then, obviously he's done straight roles in other things. I've seen less of those of the years, but obviously he, as someone who does a podcast about Best Picture winners, he's in 2 of those, and obviously Titanic and Tom Jones. And I in particular in Tom Jones, he plays a really fun part that's sort of, you can't imagine anyone else doing anywhere near as well as him. And there's something about him being the most threatening butler in movie history as well, which also veers into these things. He's the thing is, if you're kind of like trying to talk about great David Warner performances, pretty much entirely it's just whichever one comes to mind at any point. He could do it all, because I'm now just thinking of Inside Number 9, where he turns up and does this sort of amazing sort of comedy Witchfinder, I think it is, isn't it? And just definitely can deliver all of these really silly jokes with the pure class that he has, but still he's hilarious. Probably wasn't given enough comedy to do in his time, apart from things like Man with Two Brains and so on and so forth.
Nigel Fares.
I wish I'd seen him in the theatre, really, but I didn't. I'd loved, back in the day, I'd love to have seen his Hamlet, but that's not possible. I wasn't born. But I just think everything he did, he brought such a humanity to it. And he always said, this was in the recordings he did, he said, I do 2 expressions, this one in between them, and I don't do accents, which was very sweet when we gave him accents to do, and he'd bristle delightfully, and then of course do it perfectly. Yes, but behind that revolver, I was someone who cared passionately about his work, which you can just tell. The first series of Shilling and Sixpence that he did with us, I had several phone calls beforehand saying, I don't understand what you want from this and everything. And of course, as soon as he came, he was magnificent, and cranky and vulnerable, and just brilliant. Yeah. And we've explored that more in the second series, which is just about to come out. We got it just before he died.
Nicholas Briggs.
What was that film, Time After Time? Yeah, he was. He had that ability to be terrifying. I wouldn't presume to sum up David's character as a human being, as a person, because we weren't sort of bosom buddies. I just spent a lot of time in his company in a work situation and in social situations within work, and we were very, very familiar with each other. And he always paid me the huge flattering compliment of being sort of respectful towards me because I was, in the position I was in as executive producer at Big Finish. And so he was always very kind and made a play of being, recognizing my role, where, of course, in terms of stature and achievement, he was sort of a million miles above me, but he was always, oh, Nick, I hope you don't mind. He was never difficult or truculent, or, you know what I mean? He was occasionally, I suppose, a little bit grumpy, but mostly he was just, his attitude was, it's fine. I mean, he was, I remember I did an interview with him back in 2006 when he was in doing a story called Circular Time. I just recently featured that interview on the Big Finish podcast, actually. And I said, because I was doing all the behind the scenes interviews, I said, oh, David, let's do an interview. And he went, no, I don't, I've got nothing to say. He famously didn't like doing interviews. Even if he was still around, he wouldn't do an interview for you for this, but then we wouldn't be doing this. But I kind of twisted his arm because, he knew me, and I said, no, it'll be all right. And he said, well, I said, well, even if you say nothing, it'll be funny, won't it? So, all right. So, when I started recording, I think I started by saying, you're no stranger to Big Finish, are you? And he went, no. And I immediately laughed nervously like that. And I think I said something like, so this is how it's going to go. Well, I just want you to know, folks, he's looking great. Meaning that he's not going to say anything, but he's just going to look great. And then he suddenly, took pity on me and started to talk. I just talked about how much he loved working for Big Finish. And the story that I've told millions of times before now, I've been telling it for years, where we were sitting in a pub having lunch during a production. And towards the end of the meal, he said, we were doing Sapphire and Steel, I think, which I think Lisa Bowerman was either in or directing. So this may have been when he first met her. I'm not sure. You know, they became, life partners, as it were. He said to me, are you in charge here? I went, yeah, suddenly after being really nice. And I thought, what's going on? He said, I want a word with you. Come here. So he made me get up and go behind a pillar in this pub, like it was going to shield me from everyone else. And he said, I want to do this, more of this. How can I make that happen? I went, oh, I thought he was going to tell me off about something appalling. I said, well, I don't know, have a word with your agent and maybe we can work something out. I'd like to do it every day. I really enjoy it. So it's strange. He had that sort of grumpy exterior sometimes, but actually he was expressing great positivity. And so we got him in, whenever we felt we could and whenever he wanted to. When he played a character called Cuthbert for me as a villain for the Fourth Doctor, played by Tom Baker, I was worried at asking him to be a villain because I knew from talking to people who knew him better, certainly from talking to Lisa, that he thought, oh yeah, they always get David Warner in to play the villain, and I said to Lisa, I don't know, whether he'll be up for this. And I think she said, give it a try and maybe let him read a script. He might. She said he likes just coming in and doing it anyway, but he liked the fact that the character of Cuthbert had a sort of slightly humorous bent, and there was an extra and weird motivation for the character. So he was really pleased, and it only struck us that we were planning to do more stories with Cuthbert, but we didn't tell him that, and he only found out while he was recording on the first or second day. And we said, oh, he's coming back, and suddenly we thought, oh, what if he says, well, I've hated it, I don't want to do it, and he went on mic, for an interview saying, I've just found out and I'm delighted and I can't wait to come back. So we did 2 more 2-hour stories with him. And the funny thing about it was I said, David, this character's meant to be a northerner and I know you're from the north yourself. So I don't do accents, I don't do voices. I said, but couldn't you, since it's sort of your native accent, couldn't you do a bit of northern? You went, well, I'll tell you what, there was this director, and I can't remember who it was. It was someone famous who he'd worked with, who got him to do a northern accent. But the deal was that before every take, the director said, "E by gum" to him, and which reminded him of doing the accent, which he didn't mind. Although it was quite funny that during the production, and again, there's actually a recording of this, that before one of the takes, quite often the take was brilliant, but the accent was slightly not there. So I'd go, that's great, let's do another take, David, and E by gum. And on one of the occasions I said it, the rest of the cast joined in. So there's a recording of everyone in the cast going, E by gum. David, he's going, oh, sorry, yes. But yeah, very modest man, never wanting to cause fun. I remember when we had a big celebratory party for however many years it was of Big Finish. Later in life, David he had trouble in crowds because of hearing. I mean, his hearing, I think, was pretty good, but I must admit, I'm like that as well. I kind of, all the noise going on. And he came to this party and he walked in and immediately it was just full of people and lots of people wanting to talk to him. And he looked at me and he just went, I'm going to have to go, And I went, David, there's a really quiet place downstairs at this place and you could go down there. And he went, oh, I said, well, check it out, see what you think. And he spent almost the whole of the rest of the party sitting downstairs. The loos were downstairs as well. He wasn't sitting right outside the loo. He was on a nice sofa down there. And people would go past to go to the loo and then they'd go, oh, hello. And they'd sit down with him. And so he had loads of really great conversations with loads of Big Finish contributors who he'd got to know over the years. And one of them was me. I sat down and had a chat with him as well. So that was rather nice that he was there for our big celebration. I can't remember, what would it have been? 20 years? I don't know. I've lost track. Anyway, but it was a big old party.
What do you remember about the first time you met David? Gary Russell.
I first met David at the Moat Studios. I was making a cup of tea. It was first thing in the morning, and I heard this voice behind me that just went, "Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you. My name's David Warner, and I'm an actor, and I'm looking for someone called Gary." And I turned around. I just thought, I didn't need to turn around. There was that voice. I thought, oh, Ra's al Ghul's standing right behind me. And I turned around and it was that whole thing of, I'm David Warner and I'm an actor. And my brain was like, yeah, I know who you are, and my God, you're fantastic. But he was so unassuming about that. And so it's just a nice way to do things. And so that was my first meeting with him, was making him a cup of tea. You know, all actors to some extent are always professional. You go, oh, marvellous professional actor, yes, fantastic, which he was. But he was warm and he was witty, and he wasn't the kind of actor who would ever go, I've got a great idea, why don't we change this, and why don't we say it like this and this. He would just very quietly say, can I make a very small suggestion? And you go, of course. What if we did this like this? And you go, of course. Because if someone of that calibre and of that talent suggests doing something, they're experienced to know what they're doing. And particularly someone like David, who'd also done so much voice acting at that point. So, you know, there's a lot of actors sometimes who want to do things when you're doing audios at Big Finish or whatever. And they have suggestions, and it's like, yeah, that doesn't work on audio. But you never get that with David, because there's a man who's a master of the art of audio acting, so he knows what he's asking for, he knows what he's suggesting will work and make sense. I find that kind of collaborativeness just brilliant, and he was great for that. His gift was his voice. He has a beautiful voice. It's quite a unique voice. It's very hard. You know, I work with a lot of people. I work with a lot of people who do good impressions of people. You know, I work with John Colesroy, I work with David Benson, and various other people we had at Big Finish who make a career really out of, if not doing impersonations, doing things in the vein of. And everyone can do a John Hurt, and everyone can do a John Gielgud, and everyone can do all these marvellous actors. I've never heard anyone impersonate David Warner. And it's because I think he's impossible to impersonate. There is something about the timbre of his voice, there's something about the elegance of the way he performs. You can't impersonate him, you can't do that sort of... if someone wants David Warner for something, they're going to get David Warner, because no amount of impressionists in the world are ever going to replicate David Warner's voice. It's unique. And that's why it was fun to work with him, because you just sit there going, I don't need you to put a silly voice on, because your voice is your tool, your voice is your calling card. I've employed you because that is your voice. I remember I was doing Dreamland, the animation, and he said to me, how do you want, you know, this cockroach played? And I said, I think, bear in mind it's going to be very fractionally treated, I said I want Ra's al Ghul. And he looked at me and he went, I can't possibly remember how I did Ra's al Ghul. Walked into the booth and delivered Ra's al Ghul quite beautifully. And I realised, of course, that not only was he taking the mickey out of me for asking for it, but of course Ra's al Ghul is still David Warner's voice. You know, he didn't put on an enormous performance for that, although he very slightly does for Ra's al Ghul, and he gave me that completely for Dreamland, because he's just lovely.
I met David at Big Finish, of course, in a Bernie Summerfield episode where I was his therapist, which was a very strange turn of events, and not so long ago, really. So I was actually a bit nervous, because first time working with this person I'd seen all my life and admired. But he was great. He was very generous, very understated. We got on with the work. He was amusing when we weren't actually kind of recording. And he was very good to work with. You got into the nitty-gritty of the scene very easily, and And of course, I was fangirling inside, but pretending to have a very high IQ and tell him what to do. So we had a terrific day. I only worked with him for a day, but it was a delightful day.
Actress Susannah Harker remembers working with David on Sapphire and Steel.
I remember meeting David and David being so completely charming and laid back, and having a real rapport with him, which was kind of essential, and that we both had that sense of having almost a sort of telepathic connection, and that was established very early on with him, and that's really where. So I instinctively and intuitively responded to the material, and also, accessed the natural kind of chemistry that I had with David, who was very supportive and present, and couldn't have been more wonderful to work with. I just remember seeing him very, very kind of louche and laid back and relaxed, waiting in the hallway. He was incredibly unpretentious and kind of physically very loose and very, very twinkly and sparkly, and had a fantastic kind of, louche sort of quality about him, a looseness. I think louche is the right word. I'm not entirely sure, but that's.
It was my very first Big Finish audio that I wrote, because it was Sapphire and Steel. And that was whenever that was, something like 2008 or something like that. I'd got in to Big Finish after a lot of trying, and I was very aware of the Sapphire and Steel audios. Really enjoyed it. Really loved David Warner doing it, because he is, again, such a brilliant actor. But also very aware of the pressure of writing for him, and feeling kind of a bit intimidated by that. And I remember I couldn't get into studio. It was recorded over about a day and a half by Sapphire and Steel, and I couldn't get into studio for all of it for some reason. I can't remember why, but I was able to go in for the first afternoon or whenever it was. And I remember sort of wandering up to the studio, which I'd never been to before. No, actually, I hadn't been, because I think when I'd done the recordings before, it was the previous Motor or Bristol, because I'd done a couple of done a Gallifrey and a couple of Paul McGanns before that as an actor. And I remember walking down the corridor, just being really scared of going in. And, to be fair, that wasn't just David Warner, because that basically had, out of the cast of 5, there were 4 people in that who were people I'd really loved in things as kids, when I was a kid. So, you had Sam Kelly out of the Lower Low, who was always absolutely the best thing in that by a mile. You had Susannah Harker out of House of Cards, and you had David Horowitz, who was always my favourite detective in Miss Marple. And you also had Joanna Tinsley, who was lovely, but was about my age, so I'd not grown up watching everything. But yeah, David Warner was obviously the absolute star and legend, and he was a delight. Every time I met him and worked with him, he was just absolutely delightful and self-effacing, and never acting with any sort of, as if he had any, was anything massively important, even though he obviously was just this incredible president. I got to encounter him numerous times, and it was always a delight, and he never acted as if he was better than you just because he was internationally renowned.
Actress and director Lisa Bowerman became David's partner after the two met at the recording of Sapphire and Steel. She spoke with the Sirens of Audio podcast in 2021.
David absolutely loves working for Big Finish. It's, I would challenge you to find an actor who didn't enjoy working for Big Finish. It's almost a sort of, it used to be a sort of, open secret. Everybody goes, well, I'm doing this Doctor Who thing on an audio, and people go, oh, Big Finish. And you go, oh, yes. And then it sort of spread. And I do have to say, and over the years, that David himself has brought a lot of people in tacitly. Somebody will mention it to him, somebody who you think, oh, that's impressive, and he'll say, work for them, go on, work for them, you'll have a good time. And they do. And then, they get all these huge names, and it's a sort of, lots of little branches and twigs, and they've all surround. It's as I said earlier, it's a small industry, and once word gets round, it's fine. But I mean, David, when I first did, it was Sapphire and Steel, when I was directing, I played this character called Ruby. Despite what happened since, you think it's David Warner. What's he doing in a funny old studio in West London? And of course, he's just, who wouldn't want to work with David Warner? He's fantastic. And, there's, as I touched on earlier, when you're working with good actors, with really good actors, there's a shorthand. It's easy. And when the writing is there, I would always emphasize that the writing has got to be there. Everything is down to the writing. And if it's there and you've got somebody fantastic opposite, then, it works. It works. People call it chemistry. I think it's just doing the job and getting the right people together.
One of the things I find interesting about David's acting is he's got the most magnificent voice. And so one of the things you wouldn't want him to do is to change his voice, and yet he does change his characterizations so strongly, so that even though you hear, I've heard everything he's done for Big Finish, the Doctor is such a totally different role to, he plays a villain in Fourth Doctor stories, he plays, every role he plays, you can tell it's a totally different role, even though he maintains his voice.
He would never pretend to be a voice actor in the terms of, he'll always joke, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, years ago he did a drama where he was playing somebody from the north, and he had to get the entire cast to say, really, 1, 2, 3, E by gum, for them to be able to go into the accent, because he couldn't get it. And he's better at it than he thinks he is, but but there is a very subtle difference. I don't know whether you heard the Doctor Who, I think it wasn't a Companion Chronicle, maybe it was a Companion Chronicle, with Elliot and Annika, where he played a boy of 8 trapped in a man's body, and it was an old body.
Yes.
Fantastic in that. It was really extraordinary, and because he's an instinctive actor. He doesn't analyze it. He doesn't go away and do his all of that sort of stuff. He's just instinctive. I would say most good actors are instinctive. They don't need to do too much navel gazing. He just does it. He doesn't know how. He just does.
So what is David Warner's legacy?
I suppose that the kind of ease and naturalness that he had, even though he was a classical actor, and so he was very trained and very rich in his classical experience. He had a very natural kind of easy energy, but with all of that depth of experience, classical experience. That's what he represented to me.
I think David's legacy is that he is one of the greats, and everyone who worked with him enjoyed it, and they all have a load of stories about him. I could tell you a load of second-hand stories from people who've worked with David over the years, including a friend of mine who worked with him in King Lear at Chichester. But an incredible man. It's sort of never any trouble, and but not in that kind of. There was an edge of curmudgeonly behaviour about him, but it was always adorable, and he always wanted to do the best possible for you, and he was just sort of in everything. And as I saw in an email the other day to the Big Finish podcast, that I was reminded of it anyway, that he has done so many genre things as well. He's done Doctor Who and Star Trek and computer game stuff. And these are the people like myself who are obsessive about detail. So more than any other actor, I think, his performances will be analysed and talked about longer and in more detail than almost anyone else, because so many people loved what he did for so many different reasons. And he was just always, for me, a personal legacy. I always felt privileged to work with him and to have known him, and I will always carry that with me.
Oh, he was so generous and so funny. Those are the two words. Actually, I was lucky enough to be invited to his funeral, and those were the words that came up again and again: generous, kind. He was always kind to other actors in the studio, and to me, and yes, exuded kindness. He also had a darkness about him, which was, I think, what made him such a good actor. He was able to channel that darkness into his performances, and actually that's really was the basis, I guess, of our where we became close, was in discussing that darkness. We both suffered from what we called Churchill's dog depression, and when either of us were in it, we would send each other little messages. Sorry. Whew. Sorry.
No, I liked his film work. As I say, that truth always, for me, hit home. That he was transporting himself into the character. And I know that seems, basic for an actor that you should do that, but lots of actors don't. They're more concerned with their own ego or looks, and he, for all his talent and gifts, he was generous. He was very generous. That's also what I remember on that day working with him. He had a generosity of spirit and a humour. And I see that in his work, and I see that it touches something in me that he really wanted to work on the parts and not just be, a film star, which he was, but could have been, just about image, I suppose. A genuine class act. I think his legacy will be inspirational to young actors. Beautiful pieces of work for us to enjoy, and something to try and attain in yourself. A modesty, laying himself open to the parts, and also acutely, he was a bright man, so acutely aware of what was necessary, but because he was also a warm, humorous human being, he could respond to a text and share it with others. And I think actors have to aspire to that. Not to acting isn't about reputation. I think that was key to him. He wasn't there to prove anything about himself, but to translate for others what was on the page.
It's hard to say. He didn't win very many awards. He didn't upend the acting profession the way that very few people did. But I think maybe a little bit like Anthony Hopkins, he is one of those actors who you can just absolutely depend on. It's really, really rare to see him giving anything less than his absolute best. And as I said, I think it would be unfair to criticize him for enjoying acting and wanting to work as much as he did, because it's good for these genre shows, these sillier films, to be elevated by somebody who really knows what they're doing. And that's what he did time and again. So I think I'll remember him as someone who will always give me a good time. I'll always enjoy watching him, and I will always enjoy the way in which he's able to fill out what might on the page seem like a bit of a thin character.
I mean, to be fair, fairly obviously, it's I'd say just this immensely beautiful body of work, where, you know, I've been privileged enough to write for him a few times and act with him a few times, and in my stuff is just the tiniest footnote in that career. That his legacy, you know, we've got a lot of stuff on film and a lot of these amazing, beautiful performances that are better than the films they're in, or better than they needed to be for the films he's in, and also then just other bits where he just is iconic. As I say, I think possibly, you know, Evil and the Omen guy are probably the ones that will stick out the most, in terms of being the combination of really good films with really good performances that he's just there for. But yeah, I think just his legacy is lots and lots of beautiful films, a great body of work, a sense of even like him as a theatrical god as well, and just so much respect and love from his peers, because everyone thought he was amazing, both as an actor and as a person, and yeah, who wouldn't want to be remembered like that?
His legacy will be that there isn't anyone on this planet, and I imagine this would include lots of ex-wives and things, who will ever have a bad word to say about him. And I think that's a legacy to be proud of, is that everybody loves him. Everybody thought he was just an amazing human being. He had an ability to be lovely to everyone. And I saw David once or twice when he wasn't in the best of moods. You thought, oh, you got out of bed the wrong side today. But he would never inflict that on anybody. He would always be Mr. Positivity, and whatever was going on, he would be 110% giving you niceness, giving you charm, giving you elegance. And I don't just mean in his performance, I just mean in his sitting in the green room chattingness. And I think it's true, there aren't many people you can say that no one will ever have a bad word to say about them. I just don't think you'll ever find anyone who will ever be able to say anything negative about David.
Well, his legacy is his work, I guess. But also, I think his legacy is that that those he worked with, he touched with greatness. When David was in the studio, everyone brought the game up, you know, and he absolutely, because there was no ego there, he gave room for everyone to bring their game up and to come up to his level of just brilliance. I think that's his legacy as far as I'm concerned.
Making everyone else better.
Yeah, in a really generous way. And he'd say that was a load of rubbish, but it's true. I can say it now.
Is there a story between you introducing Lisa and David together that can be told?
Well, officially they met. No, they did. They met in the studio, but before she came in, Lisa made it very obvious that she was quite nervous and excited about working with David. And then I got to find out that it was mutual afterwards. So therefore I got her in again, and magic happened. The one of the funniest things from David's funeral was he insisted. Well, first of all, he said to Lisa, his partner, I introduced them, which I think was probably why I was invited to the funeral. The first thing he said to Lisa was, "Oh, I don't want any fuss. No memorial, no nothing like that." And then when push came to shove, he said, "Oh yes, well, as long as you have these quotes." And one of the quotes was, Stan Laurel, if anyone cries at my funeral, I'll never speak to them again. Which was typical of him and very funny. And actually, I think that made the funeral better because we were all in the back of our heads thinking, like, don't cry. just enjoy the funny bits. But they did play, at the end, they played that gorgeous song from Mary Poppins Returns that he's in when he flies. There's nowhere to go but up. So I think there were a few tears there. He loved doing that. He said, well, the best thing about, because he was doing that when we recorded the first series of Shilling and Sixpence. He'd just finished it, and he said, oh, it was wonderful. I did the dance shootings, I did the songs, I didn't have to move, I was in a wheelchair. But he was just brilliant in that. It's just magical. And he hadn't told me that he flies at the end. So, in a very un-English way, when it got to that bit, I leapt out of my chair and said, yes! I was on my own, so it was a little embarrassing, but it was joyous, yeah.
Our thanks go to Gary Russell, Annette Badland, Tom Salinsky, John Dorney, Nicholas Briggs, Susannah Harker, Nigel Fairs, and Lisa Bowerman. Interviewer, Philip Edney. Narration and editing, Dwayne Bunny. A tribute to David Warner was produced for the Sirens of Audio.